Hello everybody! Today I would like to talk to you about this black and red the Wreck deck with the white and blue splash. I played this deck in our Moscow old school tournament. I managed to get to top 8, only to be eliminated by robots, and I also managed to win the old school 95 tournament that we had here on Facebook. And the first thing I gotta say about this is that it is not my invention, right? All credit goes to the community. This is an archetype that has been perfected for quite a long time. And I also made some adjustments, maybe not necessarily for the best. This deck was also piloted by Jared Doucette. You can read the article, I'm going to provide a link to it. But let's just talk about this deck. It is very powerful. It has different interesting, let's say, ways to attack your opponent. And let's first of all talk about the mana base. I've got 3 Underground Seas. Now that I've got the 4th copy, I'm thinking about adding it. It's not really what I think can be done, because there is sometimes a need for basics to play around a Bad Moon, but maybe I would add the Underground Sea and cut, let's say, Scrubland, because we really don't have much white here. Then we've got Scrublands, as I have said. I've got 4 of them, so we had all of these duels. Obviously we do need City of Brass, since it's a quite fast deck. It doesn't usually hurt us to use them. And we've got 2 swamps, and perhaps, as I have said, I might cut one of the swamps to get Underground Sea here, because, well, if your opponent has got Blood Moon, it's almost a win for them, because it's very difficult to play around that. I had a decent chance in my sideboard in order to combat that, but fortunately I never faced against the Blood Moon in any of the matches that I played. So now we've got Mishra's Factory, the ubiquitous Mishra's Factory, and of course it's very good too. Strip Mine, I only played 1 copy. Well, first of all, the tournament that we played was Atlantic, but then I played in Old School 95, where we could play 3 Strip Mines. It is a house rule, but I still decided not to do more than 1, because that's definitely a card that will not give me a lot of advantage, so I just didn't have enough slots for that. Then we've got Sol Ring. Even though we do have a lot of colored mana requirements, still Sol Ring would be nice, even, you know, to get 1 colorless mana for Hypnotic Spectre during the 2nd turn. That's definitely something that we need. We've got the 3 Moxen in the right colors. There is no white Mox, because as you will see, I'm running only 1 white card main deck, so this doesn't really make use of the Mox. And again, Jared Doucette also gives his ideas on whether to use the white Mox or not, so I suggest you read the article, and maybe I will also tweak some of that. Of course, there's the Black Lotus that we certainly like to use in this deck very early. There are 2 Dark Rituals. So about Dark Ritual, that's quite interesting. We only got 2 copies. And the idea is that I definitely want to cast Hymn to Torak turn 1, or perhaps Hypnotic Spectre turn 1, or Mind Twist, so that would be ideal, of course. And for that I have got Mox Jet and Black Lotus, so having more Dark Rituals may result in a dead card in the late game. So I'm not sure whether this was the right decision or not, but I generally think that it was, because this deck is quite fast, but you know, it's more useful to have some extra cards, such as Order of the Ebon Hand, for instance, than just, you know, go all in with Dark Rituals. There is, of course, Demonic Tutor that we can use for a variety of tools. There is also Ancestral Recall. I don't need to tell you how powerful it is. And I say this all the time, but then again, it's just always such a rewarding card to cast. It's just an amazing card. I did include Time Walk in this deck. Time Walk is definitely useful. I don't always do that, but, you know, it's very close to saying that I would always do this. There is no 3rd piece of blue power. I did not include, as you can see, Time Twister, even though it might be useful with Underworld Dreams, but it's still not what I would do, because Underworld Dreams is not the center of this deck, and we mostly rely on the rack. So there is also Balance, and Balance, I've told you about this, it's not a card that I'm very good at casting. It's not a card that I can very often calculate how to use, but it does work. It's definitely a nice card. So balanced, yes, this is the reason for including white. This is one of the main reasons for including white. And of course we very often want to use its discard effect, but honestly speaking I never had that, because if I manage to, let's say, play a lot of artifacts such as Moxen, Soul Ring, Black Lotus and so on, and I empty my hand, then very often I will have some creatures while my opponent does not, so definitely not in a position to cast balance. I believe a couple of times I did that, but it wasn't always to my best advantage, so yeah, still I'm not perfect at casting balance, even though it technically can save you a lot of times. Next we've got one of the main reasons to include red here. This is Lightning Bolt. Obviously a very powerful card, does help you win the race, and obviously acts as a removal for smaller creatures. This deck is rather fast. It's not, you know, the super aggro deck we can say, but it can sometimes be more or less viable in terms of being a mid-range deck, but mostly we want to deal with our opponent quickly. Time is very often not on our side, even though we do have a lot of very nice clock-like effects. So let's talk about the discard part, because it's obviously a wreck deck. So one of the main reasons to play black in Atlantic is being able to cast Hymn to Torak. And look, I've got all 4 different cards. Still, this one is my favorite, and I just want to say that Hymn to Torak is such a busted card. Many people want it banned. I know that in some X points tournaments it costs several points. It costs 2 points, I think, in X points tournament, and that's definitely a card that is terrible to play against, because it can discard your lands, it can discard maybe the second land that you hoped for, or even the only land if you have the 1 land hand, which is not recommended in anyway, but still, it's just such a powerful card. It's something that can shut down the whole game. So yes, Hymn to Torak. Without Hymn to Torak, you know, in Swedish I probably wouldn't play this deck at all, because I tried that in casual matches and it just doesn't have this power. There can be, of course, some other discard outlets, I don't know, Disrupting Scepter, but no, that definitely doesn't work. Okay, so next what we have got is this. We've got our Mind Twist. So, of course, Mind Twist is exceptional. It's very, very powerful. And Mind Twist is something we also want to cast early. It's like the 5th hymn very often. And here we have got the rack. So the rack is tremendous. It's incredibly powerful, obviously, in this deck. Very often it will deal a lot of damage to your opponent. Very often they will try to maybe keep some extra cards, you know, not to be hit by the rack. And definitely something that works very well. Now there is this very interesting card, and this is, as you can see, Stone World. So Stone World, sorry for the jump cut. So yes, Stone World. Stone World is a card that I very often just dismissed as the worse because of the casting cost, the rack, but then I understood that it is definitely not that card. Well, first of all, because I've got it in Italian, I also have now got the English copy. But if you read the text, you will understand that this is actually much better and also worse in some ways than the rack, because this card has the formula which is 3 minus X. I mean, the rack has 3 minus X, essentially, right? And this always confuses me, because, you know, in some instances it was excess of 4 and here fewer than 3. You know, I'm not very good at math, and the thing is that essentially this card will deal you 3 damage if you have got 1 card. It will deal you 4 damage if you've got 0 cards, whereas the rack will deal you 3 damage for 0 cards. And with 3 cards in hand, you will still get 1 damage. And this is a game changer, because Very often, first of all, people will be ready for the rack, and they will keep, let's say, 3 cards in their hand, and they will try to calculate all of that. But with Stone World, this definitely changes everything. This is an incredibly powerful card. So that's number one. Okay, first of all, the first difference is that it's a different formula. So you need to have 1 more card in order not to get any damage, and having no cards will result in 4 damage. So the second thing is, of course, that it's a red card. No problem here. We've got the decent mana base for that. And also, it is an enchant world, right? So there can be only 1 of these. It can also kill your opponent's, let's say, the Abyss, Nether Void, and some other important enchant world cards. And the last thing we need to know is that this is a card that deals damage to both players. That's incredibly important because, you know, enchant world, these cards are symmetrical, unlike the reg. So this is the reason why I included only 1 copy. Well, the second reason is that I had only 1 copy. But I would still think about that. And, you know, sometimes I would side out this card. But very often it was worth it, right? And also, let's not forget that all of these symmetrical cards that deal damage or just do some bad things to people in their upkeep will act for your opponent first, and then, only then, they will damage you. So yes, Stone World was incredibly powerful. I am planning to revisit this deck, to build it with the second copy of Stone World, and I must say that I'm really satisfied with this card's performance. Next, something that I personally wouldn't have thought of myself, but these guys were just amazing in this deck. Order of the Ebon Hand. First of all, it's got a protection from white, so it is good against a lot of, let's say, some weenies, and I'm not even talking about a mono white weenie, I'm talking about the Line Deep deck, right? It also doesn't die to Swords to Plowshares, so there are a lot of things you can do with that. And then we have got Sengir Vampires, obviously very powerful and good. And then we've got Hypnotic Spectres, 4 of them, of course. 3 copies of this in order to combat our opponent's, let's say, slower game plans. And, you know, it just forces your opponent to receive damage for having few cards, for drawing a lot. And we will also have this Scepter to discard their cards. It's just such a well-thought deck with many different ways to combat your opponent and make everything painful for them. There is also the second Disrupting Scepter that would work against many decks, including control decks. My own decision was to put 2 Circle Protection Black, and I didn't regret that. We had a lot of black, especially in the tournaments with, you know, somewhat budget limitations. And people also like to play black if they have got the Pump Knights and the Hymn to Torak. So they play with Fallen Empires. Next, we've got Earthquake, which was my decision. I didn't regret it. I very often could kill my opponent's creatures, and we have got some good flyers, such as Hypnotics and Sengir Vampires. There are also Terrors that I was not so keen on, because they are usually not worth it. They're not including. I mean, they're not worth including. 3 Disenchants, because I was really afraid of Blood Moon. I did use them sometimes, but not against Blood Moon. Cop Red, as I have said, I didn't face any red decks really, so this didn't actually work. I mean, it wasn't really required. City in a Bottle, even though it can be painful to cast to destroy your own Cities of Brass, still, it was fine. Then we've got City in a Bottle. So, yeah, City in a Bottle, I've talked about it. Of course, we'll work out against some Arabian Aggro decks and so on. We'll shut down your important mana sources, but yeah, still that's also fine. And 3 Red Elemental Blast. So there it is. Definitely a deck that I'm going to revisit in some way. Not as satisfying as playing your own BRUW, but definitely is very powerful and has a lot of intricacies. So tell me what you think about this deck, please, and I will see you soon. Bye.